What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom again, and this time we got Mike of All Out War. Great to be able to talk with you, man. Thank you for being here today.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Anytime, man, anytime. It's always great to talk to a fellow New Yorker and a great hardcore band, The Sound of True New York. Thank you for also giving us some great new music to look forward to 2023 with. We got Celestial Rot coming out in February. Could the first single that we're hearing, Glorious Devastation, maybe a good representation of what the entirety of this album is going to sound like, or is that just scratching the surface of what's to come?
That gives you a good idea where we're going with it. Just scratching the surface. It gets a little bit more extreme as it goes, but that's where we're at.
hmm did you, for whether it be this album or previous, do you start off with a preconceived vision of what you want an All Out War album to sound like, or is there a lot of improvising involved?
There's a ton of improvising, especially this late in our career, if you will. We've been around for a long time, so we've been pulling out a lot of different influences the last couple of records, especially this record. So we've been delving into other things besides just straight up metallic hardcore. We've been digging deeper into more extreme metal.
hmm Was that like the vision that you've had for All Out War in the future, even going back to the Destined to Burn days, or is this did it just kind of like happen this way?
Well, we've always been more on the metal end of the spectrum, ever since we started. And I think that as we've gone on, we've just really tapped more into the metal aspects of our influences.
hmm But when it comes, and this is always my favorite question to have with hardcore bands, because I never really understood like what the difference between hardcore and metal was really. If you play me like a Sick of It All or an Agnostic Front or Cro-Mags, I never understood how people who listened to that couldn't really be into a Slayer or something like that. Is there really that big of a difference between metal and hardcore? They're both brutally honest, in your face forms of music to me.
Not to me. I'm I'm sure there's lots of people who will point out all the differences, but I'm not one of those people.
I
When I
appreciate that.
I came from the metal world, so when I got into hardcore, the first hardcore band I heard was Cro-Mags. And to me, when I heard Cro-Mags, I had no idea what they looked like. I'm from upstate New York. I remember I bought the cassette and it totally blew me away. But to me, it was a metal record. you know, as I dug deeper, I realized, all the nuances, and I realized the difference. But at first, I was just attracted to the straight up aggression of Cro-Mags. That I found Agnostic Front from there, and then Leeway, and then eventually Sick of It All and Underdog. But I've always been heavily influenced by the metal side of things. So I've always gravitated towards the more um, metal sounding hardcore bands, the more metallic sounding hardcore bands, crossover bands, Carnivore, uh, Crumbsuckers, Leeway, things like that. And German thrash has always been a heavy influence on me, like Creator, Destruction, Sodom, and those bands. So that's pretty much what All Out War is, just a mix of all those different influences.
Yeah, I'm seeing Creator tomorrow. I can't wait for that with Merciful
I'm
Fate.
seeing Creator. I'll see you there.
Oh, you're gonna be there? Hell yeah!
I'm gonna be there.
Have you been to
Looking
that?
forward to it.
Have you been to that venue, King's Theater?
I have not.
It is the most.
Not.
It is the most beautiful theater you'll ever see in your life. It is
That's what I heard. I had a lot of friends that went and saw King Diamond last time around, and it was at that. It's
myself
at that theater.
included. I got the same seat too that I had for King Diamond, which is strange, but it's a
Right.
awesome place.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Very excited about that show.
When it comes to every All Out War album at this point, whether it will be Destined to Burn or the Dying Gods EP or Into the Killing Fields and whatnot, like are these representatives? Like, do you almost look at every album as sort of like a self-portrait or a representation of who you are at that time, or do you look at All Out War as like more of an escapism and it's more of like an external source of inspiration for your songwriting?
It's a great question. I've never really thought about it. I would say a little bit of both, maybe. It's hard for me to pin it down because I've never thought that deep about it. But
Well,
I would say definitely an escapism.
mhm. Does your personal life or personal experiences ever become like a subject matter that you address in All Out War?
No, not my own personal life, just my own take on things that are going on around me. Like as far as the current state of the world events. That more goes into it. I'm a history teacher during the day, so I pull a lot from history and my love of history.
I'm a history nerd. I studied art history in college, and American history was my best class in high school. Is there a specific field in history that you teach?
I teach world history.
I'll teach world history. So, have you ever thought about being the hardcore band that brings in elements from like early early days, like talk about the Crusades or the or the fall of the Roman Empire or anything like that?
I would love to bring that in. I've never have yet though.
Never say never, right?
But never say never. We got plenty more albums to come after this one.
Hell yeah. In order to like get that inspiration when you cover world events, though, in your music, is there like a lot of research that's involved in your songwriting process as well, or or is this just more or less like ideas that you think of out of the blue?
Ideas that I think of out of the blue. It's a lot of, like I said, it's a lot of observation.
Hmm. And at what point, when you're observing, how do you know when to like put pen to paper in songwriting?
When I sit down to write the songs. When I sit down to write the songs, that's when I'm bringing in all those things. So usually, like what I'll do is I'll start to jot down ideas, ahead of time, and then I'll put them all together as soon as the music's written.
Hmm. And do you want the music to be open to interpretation, or do you try to engage the listener into the meaning of the lyricism as much as the song itself?
I think some of the lyrics are open to interpretation, but it's definitely, I'm definitely going for a main point, and most of the time, what I'm going for is, where we're headed based on, history building up all the way into modern times. So a lot of the lyrics deal with um, basically man's inhumanity towards man, and how time and time again we've proven that we're headed down a dark path, and that comes out in the lyrics.
Hmm. Does that at all make the songwriting process relatively painful when the when like almost like the darkness of the world is sort of like the main armature behind your creativity?
Yeah, yeah, it's depressing, definitely, definitely, but it's what I've always written about.
Hmm.
It's been a main theme throughout All Out War's existence.
Hmm. And when it comes to being a history teacher as well, and do you almost feel like maybe when you're teaching people about the world and events that maybe you portray yourself in a similar way as a hardcore frontman, or vice versa?
Well, while I'm teaching, I try to keep all my personal views out of it
Of course.
and just present the material.
Yeah, of course. But I'd imagine too, you are informing people because it's one thing to be a teacher, but to be a creator as well. I feel like you're able to teach people in multiple ways.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Mhm. Has there ever been a hardcore pit in your class?
Not yet. Not yet. I'm hoping to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Hoping to keep it that way.
Well,
Teaching is hard enough without that.
fair enough. But I was interviewing this rock band, different style, but a band called Psycho Stick, and their drummer wrote a book how being a college professor, as well as a musician and a comedy rock band, there's definitely parts that crisscross unintentionally.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'd love to read that book.
Oh, definitely. I'll figure it out at the end of this interview. And being that
Okay.
All Out War originated in upstate New York, were you still also very much affiliated in the New York City hardcore scene, or did you have like your own little scene up in Newburgh, is where you're originally from, right?
Yeah, we had our own little scene going on up here, but we always played the city a lot. I mean, we're only a little over an hour outside of the city, and we've had connections because one of the founding members of All Out War was Christopher Marauder, So we had that connection going way back, and we played a lot with Dark Side, who was Blake from Sheer Terror was in Dark Side, so they hooked us up with a lot of shows. And then Disassociate, who just recently got back together, Ralphie used to do a lot of shows at CBGB, so they would always hook us up. So we definitely, danced between both worlds. Like we had a cool thing going on up here, and then we also had Albany, which is about a little over an hour. So we're right in between Albany and New York City. So we would play both scenes and then have our own little thing going on. So we benefited from our location. And it was also difficult with the location too, because, said we're sort of in the middle of a lot of different things.
Hmm. And there's a lot to compete with. Matt from Hatebreed is also from Dutchess County as well. So,
Also a former All Out War member.
oh, he was in All Out War?
He was All Out War from 1999 until 2001.
Wow, so he was featured on the Condemned to Suffer album.
We wrote some of the Condemned to Suffer record when Matt was in the band. Yes.
That's pretty awesome. I had no idea. I
So
learned.
Matt was in Hatebreed, then he was in All Out War, then he went back to Hatebreed.
Wow, that's I did not know that, and that's a really I'm glad I got to learn that.
Yeah. Matt's still a great friend of mine too.
That's awesome.
Still keep in touch with Matt.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And also, my family business is up in Wappingers Falls. I don't know if you heard of Alto Music, but that's
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
small world. Okay.
yeah. So my family business is up in Wappingers. So Dutchess County is in a way kind of like a sixth borough for hardcore in a way.
Maybe. I've never heard that said before, but yeah, I can see that.
When it comes to playing live, is there like a similar energy that you put into your live presence as you do when you're songwriting? Do you almost have to put yourself in a sort of like equally pissed off attitude in a way? Or is songwriting maybe a little bit more focused in the live presence? You kind of get a little bit more loss.
I think we're definitely more out of control in the live setting. Because if you've ever seen All Out War, we give it our all up on stage. So we leave nothing behind up there. And when we're writing music, it's a little bit more focused, a little bit more in control. But definitely on stage, it's a chaotic mess in a good way.
100%, it's organized chaos. But that aggression. I feel like the hardcore live presence when I listen to an All Out War album. But when you do you find like the studio being like a very static and controlled environment, it's almost kind of like difficult to sort of unleash that energy onto the album.
I've learned over the years to love the studio. When we first started as a band, I dreaded it. I loved the live experience, and the studio was not my thing. But, as the years have gone by, I really started to appreciate the whole studio aspect of things, and I really, really enjoy the whole creative process. So the studio is definitely grown on me over the years. And this last record, we actually recorded ourselves. And that was a great experience because we'd never tried that before. So our guitar player, actually, Terrace, he recorded the record, and I think he did a fantastic job. And it was a whole new experience, making this ourselves, producing the whole thing ourselves. But I'm really happy with the way it came out.
100%. And I've noticed that with this album, there is like, and I've always considered this with a lot more, but there's a real DIY like charm to it, and I feel like that's the most present on this, at least from what I heard on the single so far.
Yeah. Have you heard both singles?
I've only heard "Glorious Devastation," but
Dropped another one today.
yeah, I saw it was premiered on Metal Injection, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Shout out to Frank. I gotta check that one out, but what I heard so far, it's definitely promising.
Right. Thank you.
In 2 years, and actually less than 2 years, it is going to be 30 years since the debut of Destined to Burn. So, or Destined to Burn, not burned. How would you say, like going back to the first All Out War album, what was the sort of idea that you wanted to bring? This was the debut album, you had to hit the ground running. What was the sort of mindset of that versus now?
Lyrically or musically?
Both.
Both. Music, I guess, well, mostly, musically, what we were always trying to accomplish, like I said earlier, we were always more interested in the metal aspects of things than the hardcore aspects of things, because we were starting a band when a lot of the old hardcore bands weren't playing anymore. So this was the early '90s, and there wasn't a lot of shows and there wasn't a lot of things going on in the early '90s. And to us, we were like, well, let's tap into the more metal side of things that we're into, but at the same time, keep our hardcore roots. So the whole, I guess, basic blueprint was to capture, the aggression of hardcore, the speed of hardcore, the feeling of hardcore, but combine it with the sheer brutality of metal. Because at that time, death metal was just starting to really hit. So we were pulling from that, as well as the thrash stuff. So again, the ultimate goal was just to kind of merge all of that aggressive music and just kind of create something new, something a little different than what a lot of other bands were doing at the time.
So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Is there just anything else with All Out War that you'd like to promote with the release of Celestial Rot? It's coming out in February.
I would just thank everybody for supporting it so far. The response has been overwhelming. It's been fantastic. So we really appreciate that, and just we hope people will check it out. And we'd like to thank Drew from Translation Lost for putting out the record and all the hard work he's done. I'd like to thank you for having me on here
Of course.
and help promote the record. And yeah, it's definitely it's. I know a lot of bands say this, but in this case, it's true. This is definitely the heaviest All Out War record so far.
I definitely, just from hearing that one single alone, I could definitely agree with you.
Thank you.
Yep. But thank you so much, everybody. All Out War, Celestial Rot, February 2023. Be sure to pick it up. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.